Hey, what's up everybody? I hope you guys are good. Today we're going to be talking about the Galaxy Note 20 Ultra camera, in specific the Pro Photo mode and the Pro Video mode. This has been a very requested video. I dropped one for the Note 10 a while back and I figured that it would be sufficient for the Note 20 as well, but you guys still hit me up and you want me to do one for this phone, so I'm going to go ahead and drop one. Before we get into the video, I want to do a quick shameless plug. If you're not following me on Instagram, please be sure to check me out. Connect with me over there, give me a follow. I'm trying to step up my IG game, and the best way to do that is to have followers like you guys. So go ahead and give me a follow, and yeah, I really appreciate it. Okay, so with that shameless plug out of the way, let's go ahead and dive into the Note 20 Ultra camera. So I got the camera app pulled up here. I'm under Pro, not Pro Video. It's pretty important that you're under the same camera mode as me, especially if you're trying to follow along. I'm gonna give you a quick breakdown of the interface here. On the bottom, we have ISO, we have our shutter speed, we have our exposure compensation, our autofocus and manual focus, our white balance, and then we have settings that you can tweak prior to taking a photo, such as tint, contrast, saturation, highlights, and shadows. If we go back, if you were to change any of these settings and then you want to default to the settings as they were when you first booted up the camera app, you could swipe over and then just tap on reset and it will reset everything back to its default state. So if we dive into the shutter speed here, A means it's on auto, which means the camera is automatically going to be controlled by the phone. If you want to manually control it, just slide the slider here, or you can tap where it said auto and then you'll be instantly put into manual mode. Whenever shutter is in manual mode, so is ISO. You can't have them separate. I really don't know why that is, but it's pretty much across the board on all Samsung devices. So it's nothing that's specific to the Note 20 series. Next to our shutter speed and our ISO, we have our exposure compensation, which only works in auto. So if we go back into auto mode by tapping the shutter and then tapping on auto, we can go under exposure compensation, and this is another way that you can adjust your exposure without having to manually adjust it. So if you go into the positives, that means you're increasing the brightness, and if you go into the negatives, you're decreasing the brightness. If you're doing quick shots like street photography, maybe even some shots of your family or, amateur portrait shots, you really don't even need to control the shutter speed or the ISO as long as you use exposure compensation in conjunction with a few other tools like metering and raw capture, which we'll get into here in a minute. So next to the exposure compensation, we have our focus control. Right now it's set to autofocus, but if I tap auto or swipe the slider, it's gonna instantly put me into manual focus. And what's really nice is with manual focus, you do get focus peaking. So as I swipe my finger from the flower all the way to the mountain, you'll see little green lines appear around my subject, letting me know what's in focus. By the way, in case you're wondering, the flower means close focusing distance, whereas the mountain is far focusing distance, and also infinity. So if you're taking a landscape shot and you're pretty far away from like your setting, like a beach or a mountain, something like that, you're probably gonna wanna go all the way over to where the little mountain is for the furthest focusing distance, as well as infinity to try to keep everything in focus. So next to our focusing, we have our white balance. And in my personal opinion, white balance is more important than exposure control on a smartphone, because smartphones can mess up white balance really easily. So controlling white balance is very important. And with the Pro mode on the Note 20 Ultra, you have different Kelvin temperatures that you can dial in, or you can go to auto, let it automatically pick a white balance, and then just tap it again to lock it. Honestly, letting the phone control the white balance initially is perfectly okay. Just make sure you lock it off like I just showed you. So if we bounce up to the top here, we have a few more options. This is gonna be your metering. If we start over here, we have center weighted metering, which means it's going to be a large circle in the center, and it's going to take that information and expose for that information. If we go to the next one, which is matrix, it's going to utilize the entire frame to determine the exposure that it needs to be at. For the most part, matrix metering is what I personally use. It gives you a good balance between the background, your subject, and the foreground. But if you want the most control, the next one is spot metering. This allows you to use a very small spot meter in the center of the frame that you can point at and expose for exactly what you want to expose for. For example, if you want to expose for the sky or for the bright background, instead of having a balanced shot, that way it creates a dark silhouette of your subject, you can do so by pointing your phone at the light source, and as long as that light source is in the center of the frame, you can meter for that portion. Next to metering, we have our aspect ratios, 3x4, 9x16, 1x1, and full. Now, depending on the aspect ratio you pick, depends on the size of your photo, because as you adjust the aspect ratio, you're also changing the megapixel count. And as you change from 3x4 to like 1x1, you're gonna get a smaller photo altogether. So it's probably gonna be like 10 megapixels. I don't know. I'll put whatever the resolutions are on the screen as you change the aspect ratio, that way you know. Now, next to that, we have our timer, which is set for 2 seconds, 5 seconds, or 10 seconds, or you can just leave it off. This is gonna be great if you're trying to take a family photo and you wanna be in the shot. Then we have our flash control. And if we dive into the settings, there's one setting in particular that really makes Pro Mode worth it, and that's under Save Options, and that's Save Raw Copies. Whenever you have Save Raw Copies turned on, you're going to save a raw image. If you want the most flexibility when it comes to editing and really getting the most information in your photo, you want to make sure that is turned on. It really takes the camera experience to the next level, and it also adds a lot of value in the Pro Mode on Samsung devices. So make sure to turn that on. It's one of the biggest reasons to even use Pro Mode. So really, other than that, there's nothing else for me to tell you about Pro Photo Mode. So we're gonna go ahead and switch over to Pro Video. Now, just like Pro Photo, we have a bunch of controls down here. And we have a reset button on the far left. You just gotta swipe to the right and then tap reset, that you can set everything back to their default states. So the first setting we have is for the microphone. If I tap it, we have Omni, which is going to equally capture sound from all sides of the phone. Then we have front, it's going to prioritize the audio coming from the front of the phone. Then we have rear, which is going to prioritize the audio coming from the rear of the phone. We can hook up a USB-C mic, which I don't have one hooked up, that's why it's grayed out. Or we can use a Bluetooth mic, but again, I don't have one hooked up right now, or I'm not using one, which is why it's grayed out. So you have a lot of options in terms of audio input for Pro Video Mode. Now, if we go back, we have option to control our ISO. And by tapping auto, we'll put you into manual mode, or you can simply just swipe the slider. Unlike DSLR and mirrorless cameras that feature aperture priority and shutter priority, smartphones only can use shutter priority since most of them don't have a variable aperture. Some have a dual aperture, but that's about it. If we look right next to our exposure compensation, we have our focus control. And again, just like in Pro Photo Mode, we have focus peaking to help you really get a nice sharp focus on your subject. Next to our focus controls, we have our white balance controls. These are identical to Pro Photo Mode. And then we have the option to control the tint, the shadows, highlights, all of that, the same stuff that we could control in Pro Photo Mode. And the last option we have on the bottom here is zoom. And this allows you to control the zoom with a slider versus having to pinch in. So it gives you a nice steady zoom. So you can do a slow zoom, you can do a fast zoom. It allows you to control the speed that you're zooming in. Up top, we have the histogram here that you can toggle on and off. And it also displays whatever resolution you're shooting in and the frame rate. Next to that, we have our aspect ratios, as I just showed you. I'm gonna go ahead and put it back in 8K because I think shooting manual 8K video on a smartphone is just, it's kind of mind-blowing. Still can't believe that it's on there. I know LG did it, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what phone that it's on. To me, it's just mind-blowing that you can shoot manual 8K video on a smartphone. So next to our resolutions and aspect ratios, we have our flash control, which you can turn on as like a steady light source, as you can see. It's very harsh though. I don't recommend doing it. You can invest in like a $10 smartphone light that just clips onto the front of your phone or the back of your phone, and it's a much softer light. I would suggest going that route. I'll add one that I recommend down in the description, so just check there and you can check it out for yourself. So next to flash control, we have our settings, of course. Inside of here, there is quite a bit to cover. We have Pro Video sizes. So these are gonna be resolutions and frame rates that are specific to Pro Video Mode, and it's really, really cool. So up top, we have our 16:9 8K video. But if we go down, we have 16:9 4K video, which goes up to 4K 60 frames per second, and you're controlling it manually, just like Pro Photo Mode, but for video. And you can go all the way down to 720p and 30 frames per second. You can even do 1080p, 120 frames per second, while retaining all of that manual control. Below that, we have 21:9, which is a cinematic aspect ratio, something that you're used to seeing in movie theaters. And you can shoot in 8K at 24 frames per second in that aspect ratio. But if you want to, save some space on your phone, you can also record 21:9 in 4K up to 60 frames per second. It's unreal the amount of control you have inside of Pro Video Mode on modern Samsung flagships. Like, it's really crazy. So let's go ahead and back out of Pro Video Size and go back to the main screen here. One thing I forgot to show you in Pro Photo Mode that also works in Pro Video Mode is controlling your exposure and your focus points separately. So if I touch anywhere on the screen and then just hold, you're gonna see I can drag the yellow exposure lock out of the autofocus lock. So wherever I put the autofocus lock, it's going to focus on that specific spot. And wherever I put the AE lock or the automatic exposure lock, it's going to expose for that place. So let's say this was a bright area here. I could drag my exposure compensation lock over to that bright area while dragging the autofocus lock to wherever my subject is on the frame. This is pretty much like an advanced version of spot metering, except instead of being isolated to just the center focal point, you have control to move that spot meter anywhere on the frame. And unfortunately, if you go to the auto photo mode or the auto video mode, you can see you cannot separate the two. So this is specific to the Pro modes that are found on the Samsung Note 20 Ultra. Ultimately, this is probably the biggest reason I suggest using Pro Photo Mode or Pro Video Mode. And that's to fine-tune your skills, to make you a better content creator, and ultimately, it allows you to control the turnout of your image. And that's really important. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, consider giving it a thumbs up. Subscribe for more videos just like this. Stay tuned. I have a lot of videos coming, and they're gonna be really cool. And other than that, I will see you beautiful people in the next video.